just go on the fly. I'm like, nothing's coming programmed.
Yeah, do you want to do a quick finger labyrinth?
Probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Maybe this will go into the episode.
Yeah.
Sometimes
you're just not ready. Let's do a tea time cheers.
All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm Alan Cowley. This is Dr. Dylan Odhner. We are two parts of Golden Thread Labyrinths today. Unfortunately, Mike Thomas isn't feeling very well, but we got to kind of forge on. Today we're talking about the kind of the turns in the labyrinth and also simultaneously the turns that happen in our lives. Perhaps some of the synchronicities that we find, the overlaps from previous portions of our lives to later portions, the things that recur, those types of themes. And thinking about how the labyrinth embodies those, but also can help us process change, because change is one of those things that is inevitable, and we can kind of fear change, and yet we relish change all at the same time. Like we talk about both things. So we talk about, I can be really afraid of changes happening, and yet there are times where it's like, please, something change. Something needs to change, or else.
Yeah. We talk a lot about time and space, sacred time, sacred space, mundane or profane time and profane space, and those ideas within the labyrinth. It's so interesting. Some of the times when we use a word like change, there is change in time and there's change in space, right? Like when you add that fourth dimension, what you literally are, I don't want to pretend to be a physicist, but when people say that fourth dimension is time, what they're saying is you've got a physical three-dimensional object, and now the next dimension we can do is it is here and then it is here.
Yeah.
Creating this, really the reality of change when we mean it in terms of our life.
Yeah.
So that is what is just this gorgeous dance, this metaphorical dance of what the labyrinth is there are other things that metaphorically show a change in time or a change in space. But the way that, once again, the labyrinth folds in on itself and plays between similarity and difference in time and in space, that you are so close to coming right back to where you started at a certain point in the labyrinth process, especially with something like that 13th century Chartres Cathedral design. These clear spots where you are in this quadrant at this point in the labyrinth journey, and then again at this time. There's just an irresistible metaphor, I think, to a human life.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and there seem to be we are creatures of habit, I guess.
Yeah.
And that means that we go through a lot of repetitious things, formulaic things on purpose too. You were a school teacher. I've administered and been a school teacher as well, and we put people through constant routine to the point. And this is what's coming to my mind is talking to kids about time. When they're like, man, will this class period ever end?
Right.
Or if they're excited and it's over too fast. And I often would talk to kids about what is time.
Yeah.
And I'd use a meditation with them, and I'd just ask the question, what is time? And my response when they'd come back with whatever their answer was is, what if time is only the distance between where you are and where you want to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that way it relates time as a dimensional thing spatially to, if I want to be at home sitting playing my video games and that's all I want, then that time is going to stretch on forever because I can't go anywhere. I'm stuck in this classroom. But if I change where I want to be and invest myself perhaps in what's possible, what's closer to me proximally, maybe the time thing disappears a little bit.
Yeah. I think that brings up maybe a central quote we wanted to bring in for today this, which is T.S. Eliot. I'll just read it. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So I find that so fascinating with a labyrinth specifically. Maybe you can pass me that.
Yeah. A brand new turtle that's being built at the moment.
Right. So if we...
Once again, the turtle.
If we are starting this labyrinth here, there is a certain period of time, maybe as Dante says, halfway through this life of ours, right, at the midpoint of our life, that we're going to be at a spot that is so symmetrical, so similar, so synchronistic to where we are now, but we're going to be seeing it from a different side. And that happens at a number of these fulcrum points on a labyrinth, whatever that labyrinth design is.
Yeah. Turning points, kind of.
Turning points, yeah.
Yeah. So the word fulcrum is an interesting one compared to like a turning point. But yeah, I was thinking of turning points in our lives are often when we notice changes happening, I think. Because when we notice that something feels similar to the way it did before, or certain concepts reappear from previous parts of our life, or they seem to be at turning points where it's like, I've been here before, and maybe I need to make a slightly different decision, or it's like a comforting thing, or maybe disconcerting even.
It can be, yeah. We use the idea of déjà vu. Mm-hmm. Right? And people have all kinds of explanations for déjà vu. But what we're talking about here is, yes, we call it synchronicity, or Jung would, but we could call it maybe macro déjà vu, right? That can happen between you and your ancestors, between you and yourself, between you and some archetypal experience that... What is it that feels so similar about this moment?
Right.
Right. And I was talking to someone who was saying that about cities. That when they go to Paris, with the 3 times they've been to Paris, is this like similar time in their life, even though it's 10 years apart. Or when they visit the Chartres Labyrinth, which I haven't been to, that... Oh my goodness, I'm coming full circle. We use these metaphors. That was when I was just beginning this career, and now I'm returning there with a wife and kids, and and people talk about this with so many things. Disney World. You go, if you're lucky, you go when you're too young, when you're the youngest of the siblings and you're too young to really enjoy it. And then you come back when you're 9 or 10 and you're in that peak moment. And then maybe you come back again as the oldest sibling that's a little too cool for it, but then you start to find some really...
You got to have a lot of siblings to make that happen.
Well, we do.
We do.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just this fascinating journey. And I know you mentioned some things about different cities in that way for you. But
it's true. It does seem to happen, and my wife and I have reflected on this several times about returning to locations, and perhaps we've wondered if there's perhaps some reason for closure on certain relationships or events that happened in previous parts of our lives. And not to get into specifics, but there are times where we want to leave what we had before and move to something new, and both of us have gone through that in different periods of our lives. Early on, I moved down to Georgia, of all places, and she had moved up from Florida to Georgia. That's how we met. Neither of us really know why Georgia was the spot, but we ended up being next door neighbors. But then when we look at where we've moved since then, and a lot of that's been work-related moves, but the timing of those moves seems like there's something we need to revisit when we moved back to Florida for the purpose of my work. So it wasn't her work that brought her back home. It was, no, my work brought her back home.
Right. Yeah.
And then we've returned back to my hometown at this point. So it's kind of like there's interesting times where we've noticed something needs to be revisited for whatever reason.
Right. And sometimes it can be, as you said, you don't want to bring some, but you can regain or re-own a time in your life, right?
And I think that's the biggest part for the way we've come to understand it over time, is that the more we invested in specific outcomes being what that return was about, like, oh, it's about this person and how that problem happened and we need closure here. And invariably, it seems that that's not actually the reason, or something completely different from what you expect will happen in that arena. So we found that predicting what that turn is really difficult, but something significant happens regardless. That does provide an adjustment. I think an adjustment, even thinking it chiropractically.
Yeah.
Everything is getting adjusted and aligned.
Well, speaking of chiropractic, the wellness, etc., there's something so amazing about, there's this shadow image for each one of these words. We can use a phrase like, oh, let's circle back to this, or and a skilled speech writer or speech speaker, does the positive version of that. Mm-hmm. There's a trusted familiarity. Oh, I'm gonna return to this theme with a new perspective. Yeah. And take the flip side of that, and someone with obsessive thought, or just keeps coming in the same fight, keeps coming up in a relationship. They keep bringing up the same old thing. That's what's so interesting about the labyrinth, the circle, the spiral, whatever you want to call it. There's even, we talked about repetition. Repetition is how you form trauma. Repetition is also how you form memory, how you form muscle memory, it's this thing that, when done maybe actively and purposefully and with care, is the epitome of what makes us human and that we can learn. And when done passively and without any thought, is the exact opposite, the source of all of our pain. And when that memory comes up, is that a positive memory that's or is this one that, why did that come to me?
Yeah. Returning to that Eliot quote, that idea of coming back full circle and knowing something for the first time, that is always a cycle of things, because I think the first time we encounter anything, our awareness isn't keen enough to understand what's actually happening. We're just experiencing an event. Right. And so that experience either causes something positive that we want to lean into and experience more, or something that's kind of more negative that we want to shy away from or even run away from. So when we're first experiencing things, and that is imprinting on our mind and on our life, on our body, we have an experience of those things, but it's not contextualized in any way. And so we need to almost return many, many times to check out, was that really a bad thing that happened that you ran away from, or that you stopped doing, or do you want to check again? And the things that keep coming up are the things that I'm finding to be, those are the things that somehow either my psyche, my soul understands, or the universe understands, or a God understands. There's something in you that needs to come out.
Which is why there are these so-called big dreams
Yeah.
in psychology. Repeated dreams that come up once, twice, 3 times. It is your unconscious saying, okay, let's try this again. What if we replace this person with this person? Are you going to get it yet? I love what you said there. So I'm going to reread
please do.
this T.S. Eliot quote, because then I actually have another T.S. Eliot quote that is that flip side.
Okay.
So I think this is cool how this is turning out. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So that is celebrating change, but cyclical change.
Never stop exploring.
Yeah, that we will continue this. And now compare that to a poem with a very, very different, coming from a very, very different place. This is from The Second Coming, his poem. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falconer can... Sorry, let me read that again.
Sure.
Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. It goes on and on after that, but...
Can we reread that one more time?
Yeah, sure. Do you know, is it gyre or gyre? It's gyrations.
I think it's gyre.
Gyre. Okay.
But I'm not 100%.
Yeah.
Somebody can correct us.
Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. The poem goes darker and darker from there.
Okay.
I think mayhem is unleashed on the world. It continues from there. But what's amazing about this poem, written just before World War One, or along with World War One, as the world is falling apart, but also modernizing, as it is growing up in some ways, some horrifying ways when it comes to war. But there is something about the romantic era before World War One, and then some coming of age realizations for us as humanity as a whole.
Yeah.
But the point is that every one of these lines is the title of multiple books, is referenced in many songs. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold.
Yeah.
The widening gyre, right? These are things that are the framework of people's entire dissertations. They come to this poem and find phrase after phrase that describes the existential dread of where we are today.
It fits really well with... I was giving a talk to some of my colleagues at some meetings. Well, hello, Tucker. Welcome. He decided to join us. So I was giving a talk with some of my colleagues, and specifically we were talking about the experience of being filled with the Spirit in a way. And that's what I was trying to have a conversation about. And that's something that God is constantly trying to fill us with His Spirit, because His Spirit is the good, happy vibes that we have, that we feel as our own livelihood, as our own life. That's good, and we want it. That's God inflowing with the Spirit.
Inspiration, right?
With anything, you have to have a vessel that holds things. And when you think about the Spirit, the breath, the analogy that comes to my mind is a balloon. And the pressure on the outside versus the pressure on the inside is what makes something that's inflated look the way it does.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about the environments that we create in our churches, in our communities, in our country, and the various different ways that we have to be a natural receiving point to formulate or to form that Spirit that's being filled from the inside of each of us. Because we interact with each other. So if each of us just unbridledly did what we wanted, which isn't all good, though we might feel it is natively, we would harm the heck out of each other. So we have lots of boundaries that we put on each other that kind of harness some of our spirit for good reason and sometimes for not so good reason.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about taking a balloon, and when we have traumatic religious experience in particular of taking a balloon, and think about a clown taking it and twisting it up into balloon animals. Well, if we think about trying to form people into the image of a good church person, sometimes I think about it like a whole bunch of clowns sitting around going, no, you need to be this way and that way, and it's
right.
And it's like we don't even know how filled this person is with the Spirit.
Right.
So we might be mangling this,
and it is certainly risking existential crisis with that inside and outside pressure. You don't know. Yeah.
That doesn't mean that trying to help people understand what a group believes about this is a good way to live. That's what every church is trying to do, really. Every faith system is saying, here's what a good human life is, and here's what a bad human life is, or get away from good and bad, and more into here's what we're supposed to be doing as human beings versus here's what we shouldn't be doing as human beings. That's good external pressure to a point. If there isn't any, we explode and harm others from what's inside of the individual. If there's too much, we completely snuff the individual and the creativity and that spirit that's within all of us. And so it's very interesting interplay.
Yeah. I had not thought of that. Inspiration. That the word breath in there. So of course that is a good analogy. And you don't know. It would be awfully dangerous to be doing balloon animals when you don't know that. Those are a specific kind of balloon, a specific shape that they know.
I brought these balloons up, and we're in the Rocky Mountains. We couldn't blow them up. None of us had the capacity with the strength of these balloons
because you were in the mountains. Too. Yeah.
So we're like, we really couldn't blow them up. So I couldn't use it as a physical example, but I wanted to so bad.
Yes, part of what you were saying reminds me of, and now I'm going to just get into something I've been focusing on a lot on, I think we all are, which is this future, looking forward, and AI, these really rapid changes, and what they're doing to our societal systems that kind of worked before, at least, but certainly are in sincere existential crisis at this point in some ways. I know I'm being very, very general, but for some reason what it was bringing to mind for me was there are all kinds of myths that on a deeper internal level I think are about, for instance, in creation myths, are about humanity as a whole. And then there's the microcosm as for that of an individual. Emanuel Swedenborg talks about this, but the innately human need to separate what you want from what you do, to give that separation, right?
Yeah.
The flood myth being sort of saying, when we are children, I want that candy. I take that candy. They have not been thrown out of the Garden of Eden yet.
Yeah.
There is, and we don't blame, we know as a culture not to blame that 1-year-old for, right? Or if you see someone with a different mental capacity, right, as an adult, people are actually deeply compassionate if they're, in the right settings for saying, oh, I recognize this person's different, more childlike.
Yeah.
We do not hold people
accountable
in the same way for those things. And then at a certain point, you learn, I can simultaneously want that chocolate on that table and not take it, right? And that maybe eventually you build that willpower and hopefully internalize it so that it isn't just always... It's fine to start out not speeding because you don't want to get a ticket, but you really do hope that by what I call second adulthood, there's some part of people that is saying, oh, I don't want to get a ticket, and I genuinely don't want to hurt someone, right? And I don't want to be disrespectful to people driving through their towns, and I don't,
Yeah.
That by repetition, we actually change our own model on it. And if I can just, no pun intended, circle back here, with these newer technologies, something like AI, we haven't, even as adults, we have not learned that toddler to child lesson yet. Things like, we all know that every time we click a clickbait link, that feeds an AI saying this works even better. If we could all say, I think that is trying to ignite my limbic system, right? And avoid it, then those algorithms would learn something different, and that algorithm would mature. Go ahead.
Can I throw this into the mythology?
Yeah.
So even just using this one, because it's one of those cool ones where I feel like the Lenape creation myth, or a lot of Native American creation myths, mirror the Genesis creation story with Adam and Eve in the garden. There's a creation of man and then woman in a very particular way and order that's not necessarily speaking to male, female, but about characteristics of humanity.
Right.
And it's exactly what you're talking about. There's this limbic system, clickbait, activated, ooh, what's that? Grab it.
Yeah.
Try it, taste it, want more of it, keep going back
Part
for
of
it.
us,
Part
right.
of us. And that is Adam in the garden, and he's going through all of these animals, and none of them is comparable to him.
Yeah.
All of these desires, they're going to run out.
Right.
It's just not lasting. These things that we end up going after of ourselves aren't satisfying long term. So in the Native American myth, you have, and this is why I brought this one up, this is based on the turtle after the flood. Essentially, the back of the turtle becomes the land that is North America, but there's the first man that is on that earth that comes from an offshoot from the root of this tree on the back of the turtle, or Tulpe, grandmother earth. And so this tree has an offshoot that's man, and he's lonely. And so then the tree bends over and kisses the ground, and female or woman grows up out of the earth for him. So this sounds like, oh, man is so lonely, we could give him woman possession. No, again, this is not about male-female things, but about human qualities. There's a point at which our limbic reaction needs to run out and realize that's not enough.
Yeah.
It's something deeper that we're searching for that will be deeply satisfying. And until we kind of reach our own end of going, okay, I'm done searching for my own version of this, but I'm willing to find what is real.
Yeah.
That's that tree, I think, bending over and kissing the earth. It's an openness to the reception to the divine, an openness to reality as it is, and even just thinking of it relationally, because it is put in the context of a male-female relationship. As soon as we have other people to interact with, going back full circle to the environment, the things that we want might not be the things that our spouse wants.
Right.
And then we have to compromise.
Yeah.
And we have to make decisions together in a different way. And so everything changes, and it becomes real when we're outside of that just reaction. We come back to it and go, is this something that's good?
Yeah. Is this Lenape myth, that specific one?
Yeah.
I'm not
They go off
remembering.
to the north.
Now, so that's a flood myth, right? A flood creation myth
Flood
fusion,
creation myth
right?
fusion, yeah.
Yeah. So, like Noah and the Ark,
Yep.
like in Gilgamesh, in the story of Gilgamesh, right? The Epic of Gilgamesh. All these things, we're already looking at a evolution of humanity, because the point of a flood is, can you, deluge, can you or can you not float between sky and water, right? Can you or can you not delayed gratification? Can you or can you not separate yourself from, through ingenuity, through innate, so these different ways to say, once again now, I still want more ice cream, but I'm not going to for these other reasons. That would be that ability to float above the surface and survive that deluge. And I think we can sort of flip it on its head and say, those children, those people without that faculty, this isn't a challenge that is designed for them.
Well, even take it out of that context and put it into the context of addiction, where, and I speak for this from my own personal experience as an alcoholic, a sober alcoholic, thankfully.
Yeah.
But there were points in time where I couldn't fathom being able to, in my will, make a different decision than to drink.
Right.
And it was so frustrating because with all of my heart, I wanted to feel differently. I wanted to not want to drink. And I couldn't. So there's this dead end where every day it's waking up and you end up in the same dead end spot and you can't turn around. And you don't know there's a turn.
Well, and there's this, that's really beautiful because, I don't want to give this impression of, oh, this is on the macro level, this is a phase that humans developed this and now we have it. Yeah. Or that there's a moment in your life when you suddenly develop this ability to, no, that is, willpower is a battle in every aspect. And when we do bring in new technology type things, you can take this in every single way. The substances that exist now are innately more addictive than the ones that were 50 years ago, right? That these screens and the feelings we get, right? The endorphins we receive from seeing a video that we do not like, just like you were saying. I can look at something and say, I do not feel happier scrolling through my phone right now. I do not enjoy it. I would be happier if I turned my phone off. I, right now at least, do not have the willpower to do that. Yeah. Which means that with newly created technological things, we eat sugar that is more perfectly refined sugar than existed before, right? So our stomachs need to develop ways to deal with that, or our willpower does, right? So I'm coming back to something like AI, where it could be a growing process, where we need technologies to be developed, where more and more finally some things like apps that say, I can pre-program willpower into this, for instance.
So, I think there are some conversations, at least in this vein, about, hey, let's not go too fast into this technology, because in some ways it's we can't impede its progress to certain degrees. The question is can we provide safety nets along the way? An analogy one of my teachers in seminary school used a lot was a baby gate on the steps.
Yeah.
And he would use this as an analogy for freedom for our children. And he would talk about, you want your kid to be able to go up a few stairs, take a safe tumble, so they can learn what tumbling's like. Because later on in life, they're not going to have a baby gate at the bottom all the time. So that first time they start running up the stairs, you don't want them to run up the stairs, get 3/4 of the way up, and
Well,
so you might put it 3 steps up, and then you might move it 5
what
steps.
Jeremy Irwin used to say was, when your toddler's running to the street, into the road, you don't yell, "Dude, the laws of inertia dictate such that when one body of mass that is larger than yours," you don't do that. You say stop, and you make a rule. You make a gate at the stairs, and that's what we don't have parents in our society right now. We don't have, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The governmental structures are not doing that. I'm not saying they're not trying or that they can't again.
Or that there aren't individuals.
For sure.
There's definitely, I think we're just in a state of humanity where there's a lot of chaos.
Yeah.
And it's because there's a lot of uncertainty. And it goes back to what you were talking about, that pre-World War I era, was because we didn't quite all know, and our whole Earth didn't quite know that we all existed yet.
Yeah.
At that point, and from then on, there's very few cultures that are still isolated.
Right.
There are some.
It's a moment of globalization that...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in such a destructive way. Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
checking on the time.
Yeah.
So we have that pattern of stepping in it, backing out and going, whoa, what did we just do? We stepped in it again in World War II. And so
But
wonder,
suddenly
what do we
stepping
learn?
in it used to be, during the feudal age, stepping in it and falling into this trap of war
Was
meant
swords.
12 people dying, right? And then we developed one type, an H-bomb, and then we developed, right, like, we are stepping in it can progressively become, these could theoretically truly be,
Can I turn our conversation a little bit?
Yeah.
I think this is a useful turn. I was thinking about relationships with my brothers.
Sure.
Because that's where we kind of have repeated battles with... You have brothers, I have brothers and sisters as well. You have sisters, but... I've had lots of different battles with different siblings, and that doesn't mean I don't love the heck out of them. We are really close in many ways. It doesn't mean we've not argued profusely over the years. It's interesting to think about how we learn about each other and about ourselves through those arguments with siblings in ways that we wouldn't necessarily learn otherwise, because siblings... we don't know life without them.
Right.
And so we are so much more ourselves with them than almost anyone else. They're the best sounding board for our actual behavior, is to see.
Although we can slip back into our childhood.
Yeah. But thinking about war on a grand scale, being like brothers getting into a fight. And as a relationship progresses, we go from being toddlers smacking each other and gouging you. They don't do much harm to each other, but you can start building grudges, and those can last a long time. You can also have good times that pull things together, but thinking about those battles over the years and how as adults, fully functional, we could destroy each other.
Right.
Either socially, at work, in relationships,
or a physical punch to the face.
We could destroy each other in so many different ways, and we don't.
Right.
Is that out of fear? No, it's out of love. It's not because we fought so many times that we learned how to kill each other. We fought so many times that we learned how to love each other better.
Yeah.
And where our differences are and where we need to go, oh, that's them, this is me.
I love that.
So, on a global scale, is that what war is?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is a danger with with a PhD in mythology. I do more bouncing between macrocosm and microcosm and cosmos than just about anyone, and there is
Tucker's getting hungry. He says it's time.
Yeah. There is a danger, which I know you know, but the microcosm macrocosm game, when wars have a bunch of millions of microcosms within them, that for them their life just ends, right? In that war, in that combat. So it's not the same as the metaphor of the cells in our bodies that happen when we scrap with a sibling. So there's a yes and there's a no. And the danger is maybe the metaphor falls through because we have stopped getting stronger. Yes, I could be knocked out by a sibling, but there are some weapons.
I had one of my siblings who passed away. That was pretty young. I was 19. He was 21, and so we weren't done our battles, I'm sure.
Right.
And my other brother Will and I will often talk about the parts of life that we often forget that he would have gone through. The struggles that we've gone through in the last 25 years, the ups and downs and the personal issues and the whatever character traits we've developed since then. Just going, what would he have gone through? How would he have faced these things? But me and Levi can't battle anymore.
Yeah.
In the same way, just like if we get too destructive with each other, I think our world is going to become too far off center. You go back to that in the poem, the falcon not hearing the falconeer anymore. There's no call to unity for humanity.
There's no organizing principle,
Yeah, once we stop seeing other countries or other peoples as human and would wipe them out, I guess the conversation ends.
Yeah, there's, that's what many sci-fi stories would indicate, that maybe our only hope now, and I hate to be so desperate here, but this isn't how I feel either, but our only hope would be a truly external other to band together against, right? That our circle needs to grow one level. We've reached the limits of where, we, as human beings, or even before we were human beings, there's the self, and everything is the other, and then you push to increase through mythology and stories that us to a family structure, and then to a tribal structure, and then when you create things like religions and stories, you're able to say, oh, even though you're not in the same tribe as me, you're in the same nation as I am.
So do you think perhaps, and I think it might be useful really quick to touch base on the purpose of mythology, I guess, if we want to put it in that terms, like what do those creation stories do for us as a society? And what I want to get to is the cohesion. I want you to answer that because you're the doctor of that. Yeah. And I've got just plenary reading in it. But thinking about the mythologies that have existed in our various different cultures and persist, do we not have one that's big enough for global populations? So not everybody's going to identify with Adam and Eve.
Right.
Not everybody's going to identify with Tulpi, the grandmother turtle. Not everybody's going to identify with, various different origin stories to the point where we can have cohesion by means of them anymore. And a lot of the mythology is thrown out the window these days as silly stories. So let's start with purpose of mythology, and then maybe we'll walk back into our conversation.
Yeah, there are so many answers for this, but one thing I've always thought is that myths are a packaging unit for conveying
an animal lover.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
For conveying complex, maybe too complex of ideas, and being able to code them into a myth with crazy amounts of nuance that you can zoom in.
Yeah.
So it's this incredible message delivering system. Take something like exponential growth. There are myths about Ragnarok and everything surrounding that story. That is...
He knows the microphone is something important. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.
We're recording in our house, if you didn't know that.
Just that those would be myths about conveying the concept, the very difficult concept of exponential growth to someone, right? But in answer to your larger question, and I do not think that archetypal psychology or archetypes are more powerful or more meaningful or more touching than myth. That's the opposite of how I actually feel. But take something like the Labyrinth, which there are many myths about the Labyrinth, but it is an archetypal structure. That may be how we extend that circle beyond, right?
So it's not
Adam
the
and Eve
story.
doesn't apply, but creation does. Cosmological symbols apply to everyone.
Yeah.
Right? The tree, the egg, the turtle. There are reasons why these are associated with creation myths.
Well, there's from my faith origin, which is Swedenborgian. There's teachings about how the things that we receive will come in according to the receiving vessel. The specific word is influxes according to the receiving vessel.
Like that balloon.
Yeah. And so in some ways there is creation. Apparently a dog coughing.
Yeah, that's how the creation started.
This is our new creation myth. It's not too much weirder than others.
No.
Anyhow, there is creation. Different cultures are the receiving vessel for how we relate to the fact that we are created or that we exist. We have a story then that each group needs to say, well, this is why we exist or how we came about and why we act in these particular ways or live amongst ourselves in these ways.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be different according to the culture. And why is the culture different? Well, the land they live in is different.
Right.
Some people live in deserts, some people live in snow, and some people live in near lots of water, and some people don't.
Right.
So their cultures are going to be different
Reflect
receiving vessels for what creation is. Is creation harsh? Well, for some people out in the
Nordic,
desert,
yeah,
it's a harsh environment to be created and exist. So that might be part of why do we have to suffer?
Yeah. Right, and that's why there's that magic of comparative mythology, where the further you study it, the more synchronicities you see between these stories that are so different on the surface.
Yeah. Right?
A turtle floating in the water with a tree on its back is quite different than the Garden of Eden story, right? On the surface, and then the further you cut it up and dissect it and look at it from different angles, the more you see some pretty darn similar ingredients with a little different coat of paint.
You and I are pretty similar looking externally.
Right.
We've got the beards, yours is darker hair, I've got the redder blondish look. But, externally we can look pretty similar.
Yeah.
Human beings are various. We have lots of different colors, different shades of everything. But when you get down to the cellular level, you lose all of those distinctions when you start cutting us up into our little physical pieces. We look identical.
Right.
There's no difference.
Oh, absolutely. And there are some fascinating things about with siblings.
Yeah.
The people that think you look exactly the same as another sibling, and then another person will not be able to see. And neither is right and neither is wrong. Me and my brother Jace, one person will be like, oh, I saw you were closing up at Starbucks the other day. And I'm like, no, I work at this Starbucks. And then another person will be like, how is that possible? You two do not look similar at all. Neither side is right and neither is wrong. A human face, you can be looking at eye shape. One person can say, in my core, what I care about is cheek shape and brow and expressions. There's so many different ways of sort of looking at that. That's...
It's such an interesting conversation. We do need to kind of start wrapping things up, and I'd love to kind of bring us back a little bit towards our turning and some of the quotes that you had there. If we imagine it on the Labyrinth, let's make kind of towards those final turns into the inner sanctum. And the T.S. Eliot quote brought up that the searching never ends, or the journey, the exploring never ends. And in some ways that could sound like, well, that means that there's no inner sanctum in the end. The inner sanctum is just another labyrinth inside. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, there are different types of labyrinths. But what I love about whether it is a processional labyrinth or a traditional labyrinth that winds to the center and then back out again. I know we've talked about this before, but it really is true. The labyrinth doesn't change, your surroundings don't change, but your path takes you in this winding journey that takes very, very much longer than you're expecting. And then when you come out again, your internal process has changed. Your perspective has changed, right?
So it's the full circle, knowing it now for the first time.
For the first time, yeah. So yeah, it's we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. If you've ever been to a labyrinth, going back a second time is certainly not mundane or more boring.
No.
You only come to it with more, and you know it for the first time in a new way. You experience it in a more enlightened place, or maybe a place where you need it more, right? There's just, but there's that ever newness to it, which is what a labyrinth is, right? It's a structuring system where you're walking. How silly! You are walking around in a bizarre circle made of rocks or paint, and talking for hours on a podcast about it, right?
Yeah,
it's an amazing thing that really we are symbol obsessed beings. We're desperate, exploring. Let me just find some meaning, right? Let me explain this to me in a different way so that I get it and I remember it, as if we're ever going to get there. But as it says, I love the word end, too. Because notice here, I'm not sure when it says end, do we mean the end as in the purpose? Or do we mean the goal? Or do we mean
it's a good choice of words.
The final? Right. He's pretty good at that. The end of all of our exploring will be to arrive. So it really could be the goal of our exploring
is to then re-understand it all.
Right.
And so every time we get back to a starting point or in a place where we go, oh, I've been here before, it's like, ooh, I can't wait to get back again.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah, I want to finish by this is just the definition of synchronicity that you can find, with a Google search. But the Jungian concept of synchronicity, I think we all pretty much know it innately, and we've been dancing around it. But we wouldn't just say, oh, coincidence. There's some similarities there, but the idea of synchronicity is the coincidental occurrence of events, and especially psychic events, as similar thoughts in widely separated persons, or a mental image of an unexpected event before it happens, that seem related but are not explained by conventional methods of causality. So the very fact that we can't explain this similarity. How is it that that arriving here in Paris 20 years later, I'm seeing the same person, I'm stumbling upon the same person that I was talking with there, or I'm going through another heartbreak, or it's these commonalities that we can't explain away with traditional forms of causality.
Now, in some ways, is taking it out of, maybe it's not, a bigger cause, meaning that it's not necessarily the universe directing all of these things, but perhaps more of a personal direction. We have, in many ways, a buffet of life, and the things that we return to are the things that we like.
Yeah.
And so, as we live and experience our existence here and different people, we're going to go back to the same places and eat at the same restaurants and notice the same people. And I think that what this kind of goes back to is just the effort of being mindful about our choices.
Yeah.
When we're noticing things, it's a place to go, oh, I'm actually mindful of this experience being a turning point. That sensation of I've been here before or something is allowing us on a longer term basis to determine our character in a way. It's like
I really
constantly
like that.
Just returning and going, oh, do I want that or do I not? It's not necessarily a mold being slowly pressed down onto us and forcing us into it, but us slowly choosing our fullness.
And can I say, maybe we want to flip the script here. A big question of this episode has been, why is there so much synchronicity around the labyrinth or in life, right?
Yeah.
And what we could actually say is, when you look at a labyrinth, I've said that a labyrinth is a pilgrimage wrapped up into a ball for your convenience. It's actually the answer to why we see so much synchronicity in life. Because life isn't this linear line. It's a hell of a lot more like a labyrinth, right? So why is it that we have these moments of meeting outside of time and outside of space, where we come around here and now we've gone through all this journey and now we come back to almost seems like the exact same spot 20 years later? It's because that's how time really truly behaves, Yeah. So yeah, maybe that's the answer, not the mystery. It's because life is like a labyrinth, and so you return to the same spots from a different angle at a different phase in your life, and you're going to be dealing with the same emotional things at that time. We talked about you can be in growth, clockwise movements in growth periods of your life, when you are deciding who you are as a high schooler and what sports you like and what and what kind of person you want to be. And then you're in a pretty similar outward growing phase in your late 20s as you are really trying to establish, what career do I really want, and what kind of husband do I want, or what kind of partner do I want to be. Yeah. There's a growth phases, and then there are buckling down and looking back on your life type phases. It happens at the end of your life. It certainly happens at the midlife crisis, right? Where you are saying, oh, I'm about to dip and I'm not going to have so many growth phases as I once did.
Though I've spoken, since I counsel a lot of people towards the end of life, and they don't necessarily think there's fewer changes to be made.
And sometimes it's change. Unfortunately, it can be that they don't feel they have control over those changes.
Yeah. Well, something that I might try to change for the next time we do this podcast is to not do it around Tucker's dinner time.
Yes.
However, I think this has been a fascinating conversation, and I really do hope that the people that have watched have enjoyed. Please do. We want you to be a part of the conversation to understand a little bit more about why the Labyrinth brings us together, why we believe it can bring our people together, just in general.
Why it can be an axis mundi in a time that really needs a world naval, something, an organizing principle that brings people together. Are we suggesting that the Labyrinth will wake up tomorrow and everyone will say, actually, we don't need war or crazy AI because we have the Labyrinth? No. But as a way to connect two people or four people or 100,000 people in different places and at different times, I think it can be a pretty beautiful image of that.
Yeah, so thinking about that, maybe you can go find a friend and take a walk. Might want to give a little pitch to the labyrinthlocator.org. Is that the right?
Worldwide Labyrinth Locator.
Worldwide Labyrinth Locator. You can just Google that or find it. And grab a friend and go take a walk at a labyrinth. And we think you'll feel some of that same transformative power that we have.
Very good. Thank you. We'll see you around the next turn.
Yeah.